All right, for your next lesson, we are going to do the button press that lights up an LED. So find the bag. It's a clear plastic bag with some buttons in there. Just grab one button out of your bag. You're going to need a few wires for this, one LED, two 1K resistors, your breadboard and your Arduino, and your blue USB cable to plug into your computer. So what we're going to do is when we press the button, the light is going to come on. So you may think it's simple, but it is pretty complicated with the wiring and the coding. So we're going to walk you through this. So first, we're going to program the LED. We're going to wire the LED because that is something that you all are familiar with. And remember, with a regular LED, the long side is positive and the short side is negative. So I'm just going to stick this in my breadboard, and I have the positive side facing upward or to my left, and I'm going to put in one resistor because with each LED you're going to need one resistor to resist that flow of electricity. And then I am going to take my red wire and give it some power. So I'm going to put this in digital pin number 5. All right, so we also need ground. So for this one, since we're going to be using ground for the button as well, I'm going to take the negative side of my LED and I'm going to stick it in the negative column of the breadboard. Then I'm going to stick another negative into this negative column of the breadboard and actually make it go back to ground and put it in GND so that everything in this column here is going to be negative or ground, which is why this black wire going back to the LED gives it its negative, and this red wire going back to the digital pin gives it its positive. So now we're going to wire the button. So you can see on the button that there's 4 prongs, and 2 of the prongs are close together. There's a bigger gap, and then on the other side, the 2 are close together again. So you're going to want to put this button to make sure that it fits across this dip in the breadboard. So the 2 wider sides are going to go parallel with these 2 sides of the breadboard here. So as long as it fits in smoothly in the breadboard, then you should know that you have the button placed correctly. So for the button, you're going to want 1 resistor and 2 wires, 1 positive and 1 negative. So I'm going to put my resistor in here, and I'm going to put this resistor. I'm going to bring that back to my ground line. So now that we have the resistor in place where the negative column is, I'm going to put another wire right between the resistor and the button. And I'm going to bring that back to digital pin number 9. And remember, you can use whatever digital pins that you want as long as you're consistent with it in the code. And now I'm going to power this button. So this way that we can make sure that high and low are what we tell it to do when we actually press the button down. So I'm going to put this in the other side of the button, and I'm going to put it back on to the 5 volts or 5V on your Arduino board, which is the other side of what we've been using for the digital pins. And that is all for the wiring of the button with the LED.
All right, now we're going to do the Arduino code for the button. So first off, we have an empty sketch. I'm going to go to the top, and I'm going to use a couple more defines for our pin numbers that we're going to use. First, I'm going to define button for our button pin. Actually, let's make it all capitals like the other defines we've used before. 9. So this will replace button with 9 in the code later when I use it, so pin 9. Next, I'm going to define LED as 5 for pin 5, which is what we plugged the LED into. And then we're going to use a couple of variables up here. Now this is going to be a new type of variable that we haven't used before, called a Boolean. To do that, you do bool, and we're going to call it light equals 0. Boolean is a special type of variable that can only have 2 values, true or false, or we can also call them 0 or 1, which is what we'll be doing in the code. Now for our setup function, we're using 2 pins, the LED pin and the button pin. So we're going to do pin mode LED, and we're going to be outputting on that LED pin. So we're going to set it to output mode. Next, the button pin. Now, instead of outputting on the button pin, we'll be reading the button pin. So we need to set it to input mode because we're using it as input for our program. Now we can move on down to the loop. We want this button to be sort of like a light switch. We press the button and let go, and then the light turns on. And then we press the button and let go again to turn it off, sort of like a flashlight. So in order to do that, we need to figure out, is the button currently pressed? So we do if, and we're going to read the button pin. So we do that with digital read and button. 2 equal signs because we're comparing 2 things, and then high. So this if statement so far says if we read the button pin and it's high, then we're going to do whatever is in the body here. Now, when we press the button, we said we want to switch the light from being either off to on or on to off, whatever the opposite of what it is now. So our light Boolean will be 0 if the light is off or 1 if the light is on. So we can say we want the light Boolean to equal, and then the exclamation point here means not, or like the opposite of, light. So light equals not light. The light is going to be switched to the opposite of whatever it is currently. If it's 0, it'll get switched to 1. If it's 1, it'll get switched to 0. Now we need to wait for someone to let go of the button. So the button's been pressed, but it may not have been let go of yet. We're going to use a loop called a while loop to wait for the button to get released. To do that, we do while, an open parenthesis, and then our condition. So while digital read the button pin equals high, that's with 2 equal signs again because we're making a comparison. And then an open curly brace. And we're just going to wait a little bit. Delay 100. So once the button gets pressed, we'll check every 100 milliseconds if it's still getting pressed. And if not, then this loop will move on and exit and like go through the rest of the program. So this first if statement that we just finished up decides if the button is pressed. And if the button is pressed, it'll switch the light Boolean to be the opposite of what it was before, and then wait for the button to be released. So now we're going to have another if statement. If light, so if the light should be on, then we're going to make sure we write high to that LED pin. So digital write LED high. Now, otherwise, we want to make sure the LED is off. So we can say else digital write LED low. So now this first if statement says if the button is pressed, switch our light Boolean to be the opposite of whatever it is right now, and wait for the button to be released. After the button's released, then if the light should be on, we turn it on, otherwise we turn it off. So I'm going to go ahead and verify to compile my program. It'll ask me to save it, so I'll do that. And we see that there's an error up here. When I typed button for the button pin, I accidentally typed it in lowercase instead of capital letters like we defined it up here. This language is very case sensitive, so we need to fix that. Otherwise, the compiler won't understand that I actually mean button in all caps. So now if we verify it again, we should be good to go. And we will upload it to the Arduino and see if it works.
Now that we have uploaded our code to the Arduino board, we can see the final working product.